Hi, friends, and welcome to the first episode of the Fourth Wing series. In this episode, I will be talking about the first book of the series, which is also called Fourth Wing. And before we dive into the story, I do want to give you a little bit of background. So, before I do that, please do make sure that you're connected with us on socials. We have the Instagram and the YouTube, and just appreciate everybody listening in the first place and following along and staying up to date with any new postings and episodes that we share. So before I dive into my thoughts on the book, I wanted to give a little bit of background to speak on the order in which certain things are happening with this podcast. And if you have listened to the context episode I put out, which I hope that you did, that not only gives you background about I Owe It to myself and to this podcast, but I speak a little bit about this. And what I mean is I talk about how I had already recorded episodes when I was recording that context episode. And so this is another one of those situations where I have already recorded content and I'm kind of backtracking, if you will, to record this. And I want to explain that a little bit. When I decided to really seriously start recording for this podcast, I was recording based on what I was reading at the time. And at that time, I wasn't reading any of the Fourth Wing series books. I was in a lull between Iron Flame and Onyx Storm, and I hadn't started Onyx Storm yet. So when I got really motivated to record, I picked up with the series that I was in, and then I decided I wanted to start reading Onyx Storm, and I started recording for it and decided to change up what I had already done. And what I mean by that is I had recorded some episodes for certain series as a single recording per book. And I had done a little bit of that already, and then when I started recording Onyx Storm around that time, I decided I wanted to do this read-along approach where I would record more in the moment after I finished smaller chunks of the book so I could give more of my reaction, and therefore you're getting a handful of episodes and recordings per book instead of just one. And I think it allows it to be more authentic when it's in the moment. It allows me to talk about more things. I wanted it to feel as if you were talking to friends, right? Kind of like a book club, but more frequently. And that's kind of what I wanted that format to feel like. And that's why I gravitated towards the read along so much. So all of that to say, there are some series that I will be putting out to where the format differs, where some of them are one episode per book, and then some of them we get into the read along approach, which is the approach that I'm sticking with currently when I'm recording this, which is in the fall of 2025. When I had started recording Onyx Storm, it was still kind of fall, I guess end of summer, August time. And I'm in the middle of that book still even now. So what's happening is I've recorded the third book in the series, some episodes of the third book in the series, but I'm going back in the series to be able to do this recording. And you may say, okay, well, why is that? Well, part of it is because when I took stock of where everything was the other weekend, I realized that I'd never recorded for Fourth Wing. I was pretty confident I didn't for Iron Flame, but I really thought that I had done a full book recap or sharing my thoughts about the book for Fourth Wing. And unfortunately, I never did. So then I was at a crossroads with myself where I was like, okay, you now have two books that you need to record thoughts for. Do you piece together some kind of read-along approach, or do I just record in all one go? So what I resolved is that I wanted to put out an entire series, right? I didn't want to just share my thoughts about one book. For example, I didn't want to just put out the read-along series for Onyx Storm without putting out my thoughts for Fourth Wing or for Iron Flame. Could I? Sure. I mean, it's my podcast. I create the content and edit it and publish it. I can do whatever I want, right? But I knew that I wanted to do whole series. It just felt appropriate to do that, especially coming out the gate. And so when I was having this conversation with myself about do I piece together a read along or just do single episodes, I decided that I was just going to do single episodes. So I just need to refamiliarize myself with kind of the order of the events and whatever, do some research online, read some summaries, some synopsis, and give my thoughts. And it would be better to at least have one episode for each book and then go into the read-along series for Onyx Storm and kind of carry that format forward. Because at least as of right now, I'm really liking the read-along format and I want to do that for a series going forward. So that is why we're in the situation that we're in. And I'm telling you this And you may be wondering that, why are you telling me this right out the gate in some of the early series that you're publishing? It all goes back to the core of what I said in that context episode. I Owe It to Myself is a journey. This is me not really knowing what I'm doing and figuring it out as I go, and I want to be transparent about that. I don't necessarily have a game plan, right? And could I pause on Fourth Wing, do read-alongs for Iron Flame and for Fourth Wing, and then publish the series in the way that I wanted to sometime in the future? Yeah, absolutely, I could do that. I could dive into other series and record them with some type of consistency with this read-along approach and just have that be the first one that I want to publish. But I'm ready to get this going, and I want to do this sooner. And the time that it's going to take me to do any of those things that I said is just time that I don't want to spend, frankly. I want to give my thoughts about a series, but I'm just doing it in the best way that I know how. So is it perfect? No. Would I love for every book to be consistent for an entire series? Yes. Does it kill me and my A-type self to know that this series is going to be a little bit of a hodgepodge? I actually have another series that's in the same exact boat as this, where I thought I had recorded. I didn't. Because remember, as I noted in my context episode, I've been dabbling with stuff for a while. And so I had recorded things along the way for what I thought would potentially be other podcasts or like a different route. And I've saved those, but they weren't all these books like I thought that they were. And so I'm going to have several series kind of coming straight out the gate where they're in these different formats. And again, it is not my preferred approach, but instead of trying to redo things or make it consistent because that's how it quote unquote should be, or it provides a more, I don't know, consistent experience for you guys as an audience and as listeners, I would just so much rather be transparent about the fact that it's going to be a little bit of a hodgepodge and to have you bear with me. And I hope that you do. I thank you all for being here. I appreciate your patience. I hope you appreciate the honesty and me giving these little behind the scenes. Every episode may not have them, but I think it's nice to share as certain things happen, or I have like revelations about my process or whatever that I'm like sharing that. I think it's interesting, or I hope people find it interesting. And it's just about, I just want to be authentic. I want to be honest about it. I'm not trying to like hide behind anything or act as if I have it all together and know exactly what I'm doing, because I don't. So I just wanted to be honest about that and why this episode and Iron Flame are going to be one episode per book, but Onyx Storm will not be. So all of that to say, friendly reminder, as I do any kinds of recordings for books, I'm not here to recap it fully. I'm just giving my thoughts about things as they come and based on the book that I'm talking about or the part of the book that I'm talking about per episode. And if I'm not touching on certain things that you felt was like really important, I think that's kind of part of the dialogue, right? That's a part of the community aspect of being like, hey, this part of the book, you didn't mention this or that, and I thought that this was interesting because of XYZ reason. Like, that's the kind of dialogue I want to have. Again, it would be as if I was sitting there in a room or calling up my friends to be like, oh my gosh, did you get through this section of the book? Like, what are your thoughts? This and that. Everyone's going to take different things away from it. And that's what this is supposed to be as well. So I hope that it just further supports the experience that you have in reading the books and that it just adds to it. So let's go ahead and talk about Fourth Wing. As I was doing my research back into this book and refamiliarizing myself with all of the characters and kind of what's happening, I want to touch on a couple of things which maybe I wouldn't necessarily have as much if I was doing this in the moment as like a read-along style, which is some of the dynamics of the characters. You know, pretty out the gate in these early chapters, we're meeting some really key individuals. We obviously meet Violet, her sister Mira, we meet their mother, we meet Ree, Xaden, Jack Barlow, and some other people, of course, along the way. And my ears perk up when characters are introduced, always at the beginning of a story. It's pretty easy for me to assume that those people are going to be around for a while. And sometimes that's the case and sometimes it's not. In this case, most of them are going to be significant and carry through for a lot of the story. And when I was going back and refamiliarizing myself, one of the things that I guess I'm not realizing it for the first time, but that kind of sat with me differently, is the very stark contrast between how strong Violet's mother and Mira are, not just physically, but like their temperament. They're very like stern and honest and straightforward and firm and like confident, whereas the initial impression that you get of Violet is not that, right? You get a little bit of this like timid and unsure vibe. And I think that I very much went in unsure of what her experience was going to be. When I started reading Fourth Wing, I had an idea of what this story was going to be because I was late to the game. So I saw all the hype on social media. I saw all these things about the characters without really spoiling it for myself, but I saw enough to have an idea of the fact that like she's going to kind of come into her own to some degree and be a force to be reckoned with. But when I was first reading this, I was like, I'm unsure of how we get to that place, and I'm unsure of how quickly that happens and what that journey looks like of her going from being this kind of, and even timid may not be the right word, but a little bit less than compared to these other women in her family, and how she ends up getting to that place of like stepping into her own felt very much like a mystery to me. But what becomes very evident in the first initial chapters is that while she may be not as strong physically, or even coming across a little bit unsure, she gets through that pretty quickly. She does seem to be pretty headstrong, and she finds her way through because she kind of just accepts her fate. And so what I mean by that is Violet never was supposed to be a writer. She was trained to be a scribe. That is what her and her dad worked for pretty much the entire time of her life. And then now that she's at the age where she needs to like make a decision and go through whatever process she's going to go through, her mother is forcing her to be a writer, which Mira is like, this shouldn't be happening. Mostly, and a huge part of that is because Violet physically is actually weak. She has some issues with her body where she is very fragile compared to like your everyday person. And so that's another reason, and a main reason why Mira is like, why the hell are you doing this? But her mother is like insistent on it, and her mom is in charge. So she doesn't really have a choice. Violet, even though as she's going through these first initial steps of like climbing these stairs with her fellow potential classmates and going across the parapet and doing this very first dangerous thing that some people don't even survive, you see that while unsure, she kind of just accepts that this is her fate, and she just finds a way to push through. There isn't an option not to. She just figures it out. And I think that, again, as much as she's coming across as a little bit of this like timid or weak character, you're seeing these characteristics of her being very headstrong. And those two things, again, as I mentioned, were a little bit at odds for me for a little bit, until we got in a couple of chapters and I realized that like she's not going to take any shit and she's going to really, really figure it out. I think I was hesitant. I was hesitant in seeing her success in getting across that first challenge in that parapet and like getting to the place where she's going to be a part of like a group now. I was hesitant in giving her too much credit because I was like, well, that's just one thing. Like, yes, it's a hard thing and it's a big thing, but I was very slow in giving credit where credit was due because I kind of wanted to see her prove herself. And so why I'm mentioning all this and talking about it in this way is because we very soon get introduced to two characters as all of this is happening. As I mentioned, Xaden is one of them. He is introduced to us and to Violet before she crosses the parapet and does the challenge. And we know him even before then because Mira mentions him as basically being like an enemy, right? Like, our mom killed his dad killed our brother, just stay away from him. Very bad blood between our families, like just avoid. And she meets him almost instantaneously. And so you're kind of like, okay, shit, what is this going to end up becoming? And then after she gets through the parapet, she's looking for people who she knows, and that person is Dane, and it's her childhood friend who's older than her. So he's gone through all of this and he's already in this quadrant. He's already a writer, and he didn't know that she was going to be doing this. So he was like, why are you not in the scribe quadrant? She brings him up to speed, and you immediately see his hesitation, right? Like, he's like, this is wrong. You shouldn't be here. Like, I'm sure we can find a way out. You can go, like, you're not even technically a volunteer. Writer's quadrant is volunteer only. Your mom's making you. Those are nuances that matter. You don't have to be here. And he, you see her kind of taking it in as him caring and being scared for her because he cares, and her kind of finding that endearing. initially. That's the initial thought, right? And so as we progress through some of these initial chapters in the book, again, you just very quickly realize that Violet just accepts her circumstances. She just knows that, like, I am here and I have to do this, and there's no backing out. And even when presented continuously by Dane with opportunities to get out and go to the scribe quadrant, she just doesn't. And it's like every moment that he's almost bringing it up again or trying to quote unquote help her by quote unquote saving her, you on the other hand have her like connecting with different people in her class, or even having interactions with Xaden in ways that you can tell her perspective is changing. And so what I would say that the beginning of this book is, in probably the first 10-ish chapters, is everyone's perspectives of each other changing rather quickly, right? Xaden is the enemy to Violet. Violet is the enemy to Xaden. Dane is the love interest to Violet. Violet is the childhood friend to Dane. Love interest question mark. Not sure if it's requited. We don't know that right off the bat, right? Jack Barlow is Violet's enemy. Like, there's just certain things that are set up to have you and be thinking these things based on how the characters think of each other. But one of the evenings when Violet is out and about at night, she ends up seeing Xaden and some of the older students in the quadrant meeting with a bunch of the younger ones, and they all have like the rebel mark. And if a certain number of them are caught convening together, it can be considered like an act of rebellion. And so she stumbled upon them having this meeting and knows immediately that she could like do something about it. But as she's listening in, she realizes that there's really nothing nefarious going on, right? The older students are trying to help the younger ones. Like, it's not as much of this rebellion as it was made out to be in terms of what like law and rule dictates. And before she goes in that night, Xaden ends up like catching her, and he's like, part of the like gifts that I have is to use shadows, and my shadows sense somebody, so I knew that somebody was out here. I just didn't know that it was you right away. And they have an exchange, and she's like, I'm not going to say anything. After that, as Violet goes through her classes and starts to have to actually like grapple with other students and like mini battle them, if you will, in training, she's coming at a disadvantage compared to other students, because a lot of the students who are in the Riders Quadrant have been training to do this. They are physically fit and capable, and she's not. And so she has to find other ways, right? She uses her knowledge from being a scribe in training to come up with like concoctions and recipes and poisons to not kill, but to make these people less capable so she can get the upper hand and like win in these battles. And one of them ends up getting sick early enough on in the class that they don't match up at all. And Xaden steps in and says, I'll like go head to head with you that day. And of course, Dane is like up in arms about it. But as Xaden is grappling with her, he is talking to her and he says, like, I know what you've been doing. I know how you've been getting a leg up. And you just start to see that he's paying attention and he's like watching her. And I don't want to say in a non-creepy way, but it may come across as that initially. But at the end of that exchange, the point that I'm trying to make is Xaden even comments on Dane, like, she doesn't need to be coddled or protected. She needs to be trained. And so you already start to see that even though he's still kind of this enemy question mark, Xaden looks at her as like viable. She is a viable option to be a writer. She's here. She's trying. She's cunning. She's smart. Freaking train her, right? Don't baby her. Don't give her a way out. Just train her. And then you start to see in that treatment, you realize that Violet is looking at him differently. She has Dane on one hand, who's known her forever, who's just trying to, again, quote unquote, save her by like getting her out of this and giving her these outs to go back to the scribe quadrant. Whereas on the other hand, you have this person out of left field, Xaden, who's like advocating for her and is like, she can do it and she's capable, just freaking train her. And already you're seeing this shift in how people are seeing each other. Dane is really the only one who's still stuck on seeing Violet the way that he always had, which was a scribe who was never going to be in the position to be a writer. And he can't see past that. He can't see the effort she's making. He can't see all that she's trying to do and to give her the credit. And there just comes a point where Violet's like, just stop, right? Stop trying to get me out and start trying to help me. And she kind of goes at him to correct him and get him to start seeing her in a way that she wants to be seen, and to be treated in the way that she wants to be treated. So from that point forward, there's a lot of other classes and training, and they have to do the gauntlet. And the gauntlet is like the parapet, a physical challenge, but much more involved. It's like a whole obstacle course, and they do many like training and practice sessions, except that in practice, you can kind of just bow out, whereas in the actual gauntlet, you can't. Like, if you can't complete it, you probably will die. And so Violet, struggles through that because, again, she's at a physical disadvantage. And so she's really just trying to like do research and get advice on how she can make her way through with the tools at her disposal. And the time comes where they go through the gauntlet, and not everybody makes it, but Violet does find a way through. And after that, they end up having to go through the process where the dragons finally pick the riders. And throughout all of these chapters, again, like, they practice the gauntlet a couple of different times. They've been in front of the dragons a couple of different times. Like, there is a bunch of other interactions that take place that kind of leads up to these bigger final sessions of these individual types of like challenges and events. And every time, as classmates are lost or die for whatever reason of incompleting something, or a dragon scorches them or whatever it is, the reality just becomes more and more clear to Violet that this is no joke. Again, like, this is the situation she's in, and she has to find a way to adapt and to survive, and she's not running from it. This is what it is, and she's got to figure out how to find her way through. And she continues to do that. She continues to be clever and to try her best to be like cunning and figure out how to make the situations work for her, and she's successful in doing that. Now, when she's out on the day that they are doing threshing, where the dragons decide which riders that they're going to take, she isn't necessarily bonding with anybody. She's not having any kind of interest or like real connection. And at some point or another, she hears a bunch of riders talking about a smaller dragon and how they just feel like they should kill it, because if it's that small, it's not going to really be able to fly, and they don't want it to pick any of them. And Violet ends up going to try to find the dragon to like tell it and like save it or whatever from these assholes. And in the process, she does find the dragon, but then the guys find them both. And she like tells the dragon to like scorch him or whatever, and it can't do anything. So of course she thinks that like they're both just going to be toast until Xaden and his dragon show up. And technically, because of his seniority, he can't actually interfere. Like, the rules are the rules, but him being there shifts the dynamic of everything, right? And especially with his dragon there, and the really sought after, very rare black dragon, which there's only 2 of them that they know of at this time, shows up and basically ends up having their back. And so in the end, the guys don't kill the yellow dragon. Violet like defends it to some degree, and the black dragon picks her, which is Taryn, as does the yellow dragon, which is called Andarna. And so when she goes back and she reports on the fact that she has 2 dragons, everyone loses their shit and all hell breaks loose, because it's never happened before. And so while everyone's bitching about it, the teachers kind of say, like, it's not up to us, it's up to the Empyrean, which is the dragon leadership. Like, they're the ones who make the decision, and they have to decide. So the dragons say, we're going to go have this conversation. And while that's happening, Violet and Dane end up having this back and forth. And he essentially is telling her, like, you're probably going to have to give up one of them. Don't pick Taryn. Even though he's this powerful, really sought after, completely rare and badass dragon, don't pick him, because if you pick the little one, she can't fly. And therefore, you won't have to go into battle, and you can just stay and be a really great teacher. But Violet's like, well, the other people who are here that you're referencing who've kind of done something similar, or just only teach and don't actually ride, aren't doing that because they can't actually fly. They're doing that just because of their ability to be good teachers. Like, there is a difference there. And it just goes back to that that point that I was making earlier where Dane just continues to underestimate her and not give her any credit. And instead of being stoked for her, he's just always trying to find a way out. Like, you will be safer if you pick the yellow dragon. So don't pick this badass dragon. Like, don't take that on. And also what he was saying is the black dragon is mated to Xaden's dragon. Taryn and Xaden's dragon Sigale are mated. So if Taryn goes somewhere, Sigale has to be close to follow because they can't be separated. And they can't be separated for that long. And so if Xaden goes into a really dangerous situation, Taryn inevitably is going to have to follow, and that puts your life at risk. So pick the safe bet. And as they're having this kind of discussion, if that's what you want to call it, it's kind of one-sided, but not quite an argument. Xaden shows up and they end up having this back and forth where Dane is like giving him shit for like showing up out there and whatever. And he's like, well, I didn't technically interfere. I was just watching and happened to like be nearby because the rules say that I can't. But then Xaden challenges Dane and says, because you are like, speaking of the rules, would you have saved her life if she was actually in danger? And Dane admitted, like, he was like, no, because the rules say that I can't interfere. So basically Xaden makes this point of like, I didn't interfere, but I did show up when she was in danger, and whatever played out, played out. And it ended up being to her benefit in the fact that she survived and now she has two dragons who picked her. What would you have done? And essentially Dane was like, I would have done nothing. And Violet was initially irritated about that with Xaden, but when she was talking to him about it and asked him, like, why'd you press him? He's like, I just want you to have a full picture of who you're actually dealing with and like who you can really trust. Like, you don't know Dane as the writer and in these situations, and you can see how by the book he is, which means you would have died if it was him. I went out there and me showing up caused enough difference in the situation and support in the situation without actually being involved that you came out the other side, whereas he would have done nothing, and that wouldn't have been the case. And so again, it just adds to this idea of like their understanding of each other and how these characters are viewing each other is shifting greatly, constantly. And while Xaden didn't actively interfere, what you realize is all of these things are coming to light is that because Xaden showed up with his dragon Sigale, Taryn was going to be right there. And Taryn is an unbonded dragon. So, and again, Taryn is Sigale's mate. So he was going to be close behind. And Xaden probably used that to his advantage to put Violet in front of Taryn and maybe even Andarna to see how they would react to her. And not that he knew that they were going to pick her, and even not that he wanted them to pick her, but just there could have been a point where he knew all of those things and wanted to see how it would play out. Worst case, they didn't pick her, but the guys backed off anyway, and the yellow dragon, Andarna, was safe and like kept it pushing, and Violet bonded with a different dragon. Or what has happened, which is that Taryn ended up picking her. But what ends up coming out is that the dragons end up deciding she can keep both. And ultimately, it's like this huge deal, and it's the first that this has ever happened. And finally, at that point, like, Dane is congratulatory, and he ends up kissing her. And what Violet realizes very quickly, especially right then, but the next day when she's talking to Rhee about it, is like, I don't have any feelings for him. Like, what I thought that I wanted the entire time and for my whole life after caring about this boy and like loving him from afar, I don't feel that way about him anymore. And the way that they are viewing each other is constantly changing. And so what Xaden ends up telling her that day after they find out that both of the dragons are keeping her is Taryn almost didn't survive when his original dragon rider died. If a rider dies, the dragon can survive. It can be very difficult, but they don't automatically die. Whereas if a dragon dies and they're bonded to a rider, the rider also dies automatically. So Taryn had every chance to survive when his rider died in the past, but it nearly almost killed him because of the way that everything went down. And what you come to find out is that his rider was a healer, and the healer was trying to save Violet's brother, and he basically like burnt out and died. And so Taryn almost died because of it, and he didn't. But when that went down, Sigale was in deep distress because of her mate and his suffering, and therefore Xaden was in deep distress because he's bonded to Sigale. And so this network of how this all is connected, and how everybody's impacted by their dragons and any of their dragons' mates, it's all connected together, right? And so what Xaden essentially says is like, yeah, you are weaker, and if you fuck up and you die, it could put him in the same position again where he almost dies, and that's a suffering for me and my dragon. So your success is to my benefit, and now I'm invested and I'm paying attention more than I ever was before. And Violet's like, great, right? And so you start to see this story shift where Xaden is now really invested in Violet and her success. And of course, now that she has a really powerful dragon, the target is on her back. You have people who are unbonded that are going to try to take Violet out in hopes that the dragon picks them instead as being like a quote unquote better rider or better option. And then you have other people who are going to want to be friends with Violet for the benefit of her having a powerful dragon, just to have like the protection and like to be in her circle. And so everything shifts overnight in terms of how people interact and treat her. And even some of the people are now interacting with her not because of necessarily either of the two things I mentioned, but because of the fact that her dragon is mated to Xaden's, and their fates are intertwined. And people who care about Xaden now care about Violet because they want her to do well in the same way that Xaden wants her to do well, right? It benefits him. So you're starting to see all of these tides shift. And because of that attention, again, there is some negativity that can come from that. So what ends up happening is one of the nights while Violet is sleeping in her room, Taryn ends up telling her like to wake up from a dream because he senses people that in her room and that she's in danger. And when she wakes up, there's a bunch of people in her room who are unbonded, and they're basically there to kill her. And so what ends up happening is, in the panic of it all, Indarna freezes time, and Violet like gets out of the situation momentarily just in time for like Xaden to show up, and he basically kills everybody. And Bodhi and Garrick, who are close to Xaden, were there as well. And so they all kind of take charge of the situation. And Violet tells Xaden that somebody else was there, and that is how they like got into her room. She didn't know who it was, but she knows that somebody else ran away, and that the rest of them that stayed obviously were the ones that Xaden took care of. And so the next day, or that day, when they're having one of these like all class meetings that they have, Xaden basically announces the attack, saying that it was unsanctioned and that it broke the codex rules, and that everybody who was a perpetrator of it had been executed, and that they know that there's somebody who was involved that hadn't been caught. And he accuses one of the classmates, and Dane immediately is like, Violet, that's not the case. And so you know that there's some, not relationship, but maybe I guess we'll say, between Dane and this girl, and he won't believe her. And his signet is he can see people's memories. Well, Violet doesn't want Dane to see her memories because he doesn't want her to see that Indarna froze time, because nobody knows that Indarna can do that. She's probably not going to be able to do it for very long because she's a really young dragon. Like, it just puts everything in danger. And Violet's like, I don't want you to do that and to touch me. And Dane's like, well, you have to. She's gonna die if you don't like tell the truth. And Violet's sitting there being like, well, it is the truth. Like, somebody else was there, and if it's her, like, I believe Xaden because Xaden believed me that someone was there in the first place, and you don't believe me at all. And what Violet ends up doing is telling Taryn to share the memory with the dragons instead. And they do. I can't remember if they filter out the part about Indarna freezing time and if he just shares selective pieces of it, or if they just see it all but they just don't share so as not to out Indarna. I don't remember. But either way, the message gets through, and they end up rightfully and as it should be turning against this girl, and she ends up dying. And Dane realizes that he was wrong. And again, it's just another nail in the coffin of Violet realizing, like, you don't give a shit. You don't believe me. You have no faith in me. Xaden is already has my back and trusts me, and he barely knows me, and yet you can't at all. So you're just seeing that these situations start to arise where, like, Violet and Xaden very much have to kind of trust each other and have each other's back. And you would think or hope that her good friends would come along for that ride, and Dane, who's supposed to be one of them, just doesn't, and just continues to doubt her and believe others, even though he's known her for longer than probably any of them. And it just ends up manifesting in this place where Violet essentially is just like, look, I know that you said that the kiss was a mistake and that you're older than me and you have authority over me, so we shouldn't have any of that type of interaction together. But the fact that you don't believe in me is more of the reason why you and I will never be anything more than friends. It isn't just your seniority. It's who you are as a person and how you're interacting towards me, which is putting this whole thing to rest. So she makes that very clear, which I was really happy to see at the time. So after everything goes down, Xaden assigns Liam to basically be Violet's bodyguard. And he ends up being a really nice guy and a good friend to Violet. And that kind of goes on for a while with her like going to classes, and she's learning and trying, and Taryn even says like, I think you're going to be able to channel soon, but he doesn't really imbue his power into her just yet. And so she can't use her signet and she can't manifest her abilities, but Taryn is recognizing in her that it's going to happen soon, which is really important, because if they don't use the power of their dragons within, I think it's like 6 months, the writer essentially like ends up having it all pent up, like this power pent up, and they basically explode. And so Violet, while not yet near that, is obviously nervous because other people's signets are manifesting. Her friends are able to do stuff like Rhiannon can like call objects and like pull them into her possession. Obviously Xaden has like shadows, and Dane has the memory thing. Like Xaden and Dane have had theirs for a while because they're ahead of Violet in schooling, but her other classmates and stuff are getting it. So she's just going along her way, trying to learn everything and like stay safe and all of that kind of stuff. So that is happening in the background. And then one of the things that I forgot about that's kind of funny, but is definitely pivotal in terms of the characters, is comes this night where Violet like suddenly becomes really lustful and is like experiencing all these feelings, and she ends up having Taryn basically like tell her through their bond, like, you need to block me out. And she realizes that Taryn and Sigale are having an intimate moment. She's like, well, I don't know how to block this out. I haven't learned how to do that yet. And so it's not only embarrassing that she's like experiencing it, but there's nothing she can do about it to like filter out the feelings. So she goes outside to try to get some fresh air, and she ends up seeing Xaden. And he's essentially doing the same thing, except he obviously can like filter it a little bit, but there's still some degree of the feelings there, even if he can kind of filter it out. It's just kind of inevitable. And so he gives her a crash course in trying to like block it, and she kind of starts to learn it, and it gets a little bit better, but in general the feeling is still there. And so because it's the two of them together and both of their mates are mating and these lustful feelings are coming through, her and Xaden end up kissing and having this passionate moment. And he obviously ends up stopping it to be like, this isn't you. This is just you feeling Taryn's feelings. So like, let's just let this be what it is. And so as the days and weeks and whatever progress from that point forward, like months go by, she still can't manifest her abilities. Her and Xaden like talk about the kiss, but he's like, look, we're in theory going to be together forever and attached in some way. Like, it's just such a mistake for us to get involved. We shouldn't let it be that way, but I am going to take over your training. And so he starts like pulling her into different trainings at different times, because he's like, I'm not going to be here all the time. Like, I have to go report on the line of duty. And so I can only be gone for so long now because you're still here, and because you're in a younger class than I am, I have to go and do my duty, but I have to come back so that Taryn and Sigale can be near each other. But because I'm not going to be here all the time, I need to train you as much as I can when I'm here. So, Liam is still her bodyguard when Xaden's not around, but then Xaden's also training her, and so they're working together. And, she's still doing classes and doing all of these trainings. And I think, in all of this, what you're also starting to see that I haven't really commented on is her relationship with her friends, her little group and squad that they form. It's Rhee, who she met on the first day. It's Sawyer. Liam is there and Garrick is there because of their relationship with Xaden, but like they're in the mix. Riddick is there. You have a couple of other people from different classes and some from their own class that are kind of coming together to form this little squad for various different reasons, but all of their relationships are forming and you start to learn those characters. And there's a lot of variety in how the characters are and what their characteristics are. And I will say in general, I really appreciate that. I really like that even though Ree and Violet are friends, that they are quite different, and the way that they kind of approach situations or think about things is different. It just feels like everybody really has a decent role to play, and that nobody is like redundant, and it makes for a pretty well-rounded friend group. So I do enjoy even their interactions just as a group, because that's basically what this story is. It's either her interaction with Taryn and like learning things, her interaction with Xaden as it pertains to whatever, training, battle, etc., or her interactions with her friends, right? And then I guess the other one would be with family, her interactions with family, her mom or Mira. But the friends play such a critical role and are so present throughout this story and the books to come. So their dynamics and getting to know them and learning them is really important, and you do start to really care about each of those characters in different ways. So as we get to the latter part of the book, things continue to evolve, right? There are different instances where Xaden and Violet are put in each other's path, some intentionally, some she doesn't expect him to be there. But they end up continuing to revisit this whole situation of being attracted to each other, and the kiss not just being the kiss because of the dragons and their moment of passion, but that there's real feelings there. And so the relationship between Xaden and Violet does start to evolve. And there does come a point where Mira kind of sees all of this unfold between Violet and Xaden, and Violet and Dane, and Dane and Xaden. And she's like, look, you all have to get your shit together. Like, Dane, grow the fuck up. You got to get over the fact that they're just bonded now forever. Xaden and Violet, you got to figure out your shit and how to interact with each other and with your dragons, because you can't go where Xaden's going to go all the time, and Xaden can't just show up where Violet is all the time. So you got to figure out a schedule and figure out how it's going to work when you're in different classes and have different responsibilities. And Violet, you have to just figure out how to be the person that Taryn thinks that you're going to be, and not just live in Xaden's shadow all the time, right? And kind of sets them all straight, or tries to set them on their path. And so throughout the rest of the chapters, there's different challenges that happen. They do different things as classes and squads, and they continue to find their way through. You see Violet and this squad kind of in action and using their signets, and it works in their favor, and they find a really good flow with each other. But soon you end up realizing that throughout this book, you go from around December, or even a little bit before then, to May, and all of these classes and challenges and different things are happening, but Violet's signet still hasn't appeared. And so she's obviously getting very close to that 6-month mark where, like, nut up or shut up, right? Something's got to give. And this needs to appear, but she's like feeling okay. But it's going to have to happen. And so what ends up happening is they have to do war games as a part of yet another like challenge and thing as a part of their program. And when they end up basically going to where they think that it is, it's like a false front, and they were sent off into this place unrelated to war games, and they were put in harm's way intentionally. And so that backstory evolves, it all comes to light, but in all of that happening, they end up in real battle, and Violet's signet manifests, and it ends up being lightning. And a couple of things happen over the trajectory of all of that going down. One, they realize that somebody did send them there intentionally to like be harmed, and it's not part of war games, but it's really battle. And so they know that they have enemies at the college. And they think and believe that Dane is part of that. Throughout the progression of a lot of these chapters, Violet ends up realizing that Xaden has actually been helping some Griffin riders. And even though they're technically or normally spoken about as being like enemies, he was actually trying to help them because they're facing a real enemy called Venom. And Violet's like, well, I've heard of them, but it was always just a myth or a legend. And he's like, no, this shit is real. And then when they're in this place where they think that they're doing war game stuff and it's real life shit, it ends up being Venom and Wyvern. And So, they're getting attacked and trying to defend themselves. And unfortunately, as all of that goes down, Liam's dragon gets killed, and therefore Liam dies. They've had real war. They've been out on the lines when they're first years and they shouldn't even be out there. People sent them in harm's way intentionally. They lose Liam, and Violet ends up getting injured as well. And so I'm speeding through a lot of this not because the content doesn't matter, but there is a lot to that, right? There's a lot to each of how their abilities come to life, the part that Violet plays, what it ends up meaning in terms of how her and Xaden interact in this battle together. By this point in the story, we're at the end of book 1. Her and Xaden can communicate with each other through their bond in their minds, so they don't have to actually talk to each other. They can be farther away and communicate through the bond, which does prove useful in battle. But there's also downsides to a lot of that, right? So you see a lot of this come to life and the interaction of all of these characters together, and obviously suffer losses. And in the end of it all, Violet ends up getting injured and poisoned through this battle. And because they're away from the college at this outpost where they thought, again, it was for war games, they're like, well, what do we do? Like, she's going to die and she needs a healer and we don't have one here. And Xaden's like, well, I know what we're going to do about it. And so they end up going somewhere else. And Violet's point of view in the book is in and out of consciousness because she's poisoned and obviously dying. And when she comes to, you realize that they're in another place. Xaden and her friends essentially saved her and brought her to a place of refuge. And what you end up realizing is that her brother Brennan is alive. He is the one who healed her, and he basically welcomes her to this revolution. And even now, after I've read this book, and I've known now for another book and a half after that Brennan has been alive, I still get goosebumps because it's such a twist that you don't really think is going to happen. For me, at least as a reader, I don't ever feel like there was any alluding to Brennan in a way where he could be alive. Like, yes, they mentioned the dynamics of Violet's mom having killed Xaden's dad and Xaden's dad having killed Brennan, but they talk about it in terms of the context of the families and their dynamic with each other and their relationship with each other. But he doesn't come up a ton. Like, he does because earlier on in the book, Mira ends up giving Violet a book of Brennan's where he like took notes and talks about going through school and like gives tips and stuff, kind of like a journal or a diary that like she had and that Mira was then giving to Violet to use to her benefit. So in that way, Brennan is present because she's reading these excerpts and like learning from him. But it almost makes it feel even more like he's not coming back because that's all that she has, right? And so I didn't see this coming. And when you find out that Xaden was helping the Griffin Riders against this other enemy, the Venin, you realize that there's stuff going on that is outside of the bounds of the college and that Xaden's involved in shit that is more than you know, which Dane does speak about earlier in the book. Like, he's like, look, because of my abilities, I have classified access to things. And I know that Xaden is not necessarily like as honest as you think he is. And even though Dane doesn't exactly know what Xaden's doing, and when you find out what Xaden's doing, you don't know for sure that Dane knows that. It's hinted at earlier on in the book that there is other stuff happening that Xaden's involved in. But I never really thought about it from the perspective of being a rebellion. I thought him just helping the Griffin Riders would be enough because to the college, the Griffin Riders and this group of people are the enemy. But they're not. They're only trying to get resources from the college and, from the main land because they're trying to survive from this enemy. And so Xaden is just trying to help them survive. He doesn't see them as the enemy. The Venin is the enemy because the Venin will kill everyone. These Griffin Riders are just trying to survive. So you think that that's it. Like, you think that that's the thing that Dane is alluding to, but come to find out there's this whole other revolution. And so the book leaves off at that place where you're about to realize Dane, or where you're about to go into this whole thing of Violet processing Brennan being alive, find out what the hell they mean about this revolution. Like, it just opens up a whole other door that makes for a really exciting entrance into Iron Flame. And so, all of that to say, what I hope that you take out of all of this is I personally really enjoy Rebecca Yarros and her character development and her world building and the relationships that she's creating between the characters. I appreciate the fact that she can surprise me. Granted, this is my first book of hers, so it's my introduction to her writing style. So I don't really know what to expect, right? But I'm coming away realizing that what I just said, right? I like the fact that I can be surprised by her. I like the fact that she can incorporate plot twists that I don't necessarily see coming from a mile away. I appreciate that I didn't always know what Violet was thinking. It wasn't easy for me to always assume how she would react or behave. I will say, though, that there are times throughout this book, even though I've talked about the fact of how she stood up for herself to Dane, where I did struggle with her lack of ability to do certain things. And it's not just from the physical aspect, but I think that there was moments where she could have stepped up a little bit more. And so I do think that what you see from Violet is that contrast of she's now stepped into kind of her own, and she knows that this is her life, and she's accepted that she's a writer, and now she has these huge responsibilities with not just one but two dragons, and not even just two, but one of them being one of the most powerful on the entire continent. You know she's processing that and figuring out what this all means. But with that, I think I just expected her, or hoped at least, that she would just kind of find her badassness and just own the shit out of it. And she doesn't. She still has moments where there's a lot of trepidation. And I think I struggle with that. It's like she can be confident and cunning, and she can be badass and smart and intelligent in certain situations, or in battle briefings, or in classes, or whatever. But then there are moments where she just almost doubts herself. And you're like, how can those things be at odds with each other? But what I appreciate about all that is I am feeling all of that as much as I think the characters are. So because of the writing and the quality of it, I can really put myself in their shoes. And I can feel the frustration and the anxiety and the tension very easily. It's easy for me to imagine those things and to feel them and embody that as I'm reading. And I think part of that is the writing. I do want to recognize that I think part of that is just me as a person. I have a very active imagination, and I am very empathetic. And so I think that what I'm interested to hear about from y'all in the community is like, if you're not that way, or you don't have those characteristics, what is this reading experience like for you? How do the characters resonate, or do they not? What is it like from your perspective? But for me, I can really easily put myself into the shoes of these characters and in this story. And her writing, the way that Rebecca writes, makes that very easy. So all in all, I come away from book one obviously being a fan, so much so that we already know at this point I've read book two. I'm excited to reacquaint myself with all of the happenings of that book and give you all my thoughts. A lot of juicy stuff continues to happen and take place, so definitely no shortage of excitement in that regard. And again, I understand that it's going to be a little bit weird that I have all of my reaction to this book in one episode, and the same for Iron Flame, and a different format for Onyx Storm, but I'm still excited to hear your thoughts. I hope that you continue to listen along and that you find this exciting and interesting, and just I'm excited to hear from everybody and what they think. So truly, I thank you all for being here. I thank you for following along and being invested. It is really a lot of fun for me to do this and to share my thoughts, and I hope that you enjoy it as well. So thank you again, and until next time, friends.